Okay, because I'm gonna be very quick because I'm right in the middle of the lesson as well. I'm going to explain what we do in Harris as a multi-academy trust. So a quick 1 minute just to tell you our context, which is a multi-state academy trust. There are 8 schools delivering Latin in mainstream up to GCSE and A-level. And number of students vary based on the selection process, which I'm going to be discussing in a minute. Every school follows at Key Stage 3, depending on the time allocation, a reading approach, which is either CLC or Superani. And the majority of the schools offer Latin and classics as an addition to their chosen MFL. However, my school that I'm going to be talking about considers Latin as a part of a language allocation. So the students that they do Latin in Harris Chapel 100, they do not do any other modern foreign language. I'm in a very fortunate position because our executive head is a language teacher. We have 2 hours, 50 minutes per week in doing Latin. I know other contexts, they might not be have this kind of luxury in times, and this does not change at all up to GCSE. So we have the kids twice a week for 2 hours, 50 minutes, almost 3 hours. And the bad news for the students is that once they are given this option in year 7, they cannot withdraw, and they're going to be suffering until GCSE. So there is a big competition in my school because we have 5 more languages. So I have to compete between Mandarin, German, French, Spanish, and whatsoever. In year 10, students are offered a 7 classical subject of ancient history, and we have it at A-level Latin and ancient history as well, with a small number of students, which is the Harris Chapel is the only one that does it at the moment at A-level Latin and ancient history. Now, at glance at Key Stage 3 Latin, because we have this, as I said, we are very good position in offering it from year 7. We try to create a very engaging learning environment. So we are reading the stories and we're using the culture as a vehicle in language acquisition. And I have this strong belief that using the culture could be much more motivating on starting the grammar approach, which used to be in the past. So in year 7, because of the time that I just mentioned, we're doing the CLC Book 1, year 8 CLC Book 2, and CLC Book 3. However, with the new editions, we have adapted few bits, especially towards the Book 3, which can get quite overwhelming with army stuff, and I'm going to be showing it in a minute. So we have our curriculum MTPs mainly based on 5 pillars: vocabulary acquisition, of what Henry as well mentioned previously, and Julie. We have the reading of the stories, obviously, engaging activities, the adaptive teaching, which is the new terminology for differentiation, and the pacing. And this is the 5 pillars that you will see on my next slide, that they are translated into the long-term plannings and the medium-term planning. What the half-term looks at Hatch. So during a half-term or the 6 weeks, students are given a set of skills, which are the building blocks for unlocking this language acquisition and making it a little bit more engaging. So, and this is further supported with the knowledge organizers, which is a policy that we follow when we do our medium-term planning, which I'm going to be showing you as well. So, as I said, our lessons are designed in a way that in that 1 hour, 20 minutes that we have per period, we always trying to integrate any language element and a cultural element. And the reason why is because we don't want to be overloading them cognitively with just language. And we try to keep it quite engaging for the students. So we have, obviously, we might start with stage 3, talking a little bit about the stories of the characters, and then we're going quickly to the culture, which is about the forum, let's say. Then when we do the middle-term planning, we're focusing on 3 different aspects: the what, the how, and the endpoints. The endpoints is something that I know a colleague of ours, which is I think attending, Lottie, introduced this on the CLC, the inquiry questions, which I find them quite important as well, because it keeps you in track of what you're doing on the middle term planning. So the what is what the students should know, the facts. The procedural is how they apply the things that they know. And the endpoints in the inquiry questions influenced by history, discipline, and the new edition of the CLC, as I just mentioned. So there are 3 elements on those middle term planning. So this one is quite, I know some of you might find it quite overwhelming because there are a lot of things, a lot of information there, but this is an example of what we do in year 7. And in year 9, you're gonna see that it's quite more different because I just changed it. We do a combination of CLC, which is the first year we tried it, with CLC and Suburani at the same year. So you can see that there are stated declarative, procedural, and the endpoints further down, and what the kids should be able to know. If we look at the endpoints on the very, very bottom of that, you can see that there are some questions. So when you do your middle term planning, what is very important to understand is that by the end of the half term 1, are my students going to be able to answer those questions? If not, it's just the backwards planning, it's called. It's how we do it in school. It's backwards planning. We start with the endpoints and trying to see what we can do and plan in order to facilitate those endpoints. What is important is the knowledge organizers that I just mentioned. We include on our MTPs, we include knowledge organizers, which is again is a policy from the school. And you can see that there are 6 weeks in a half term, and you can see that every single week, students must be able to recall this declarative knowledge. So, and how you're gonna ask me how we are going to assess this. We're going to assess them during their lesson. Every single lesson, every single week, they have a quiz, which is on 6 questions. And again, and they're tracking those questions individually on their books. So this one is from year 7. The second one is from year 8. And then the third one is from year 9, that it becomes a little bit more complicated. We try obviously to keep it as simple as possible, but obviously the older you get, year 7, 8, 9, the more complicated is the grammar. But I'm trying to orientate it towards the EDUCAS GCSE. Now, this is an example of how these knowledge organizers during our MTPs are translated into the classroom, which is this one, which is all about retrieval practice. So when you look into your MTPs, ask yourselves of what the students should have known from last lesson, last week grammar, and last week civilization. So again, you can see what I said at the beginning of this session, that we try to integrate within the same lesson elements of both skills and of language acquisition, vocabulary acquisition, grammar acquisition, and civilization. So, and it doesn't need to be something extravagant. You can see this is just a single table with four elements, and they track those questions into their those scores into their books, which is with the marking scheme along. And we have also this literacy, which is again a very big drive in my school, that we have every single week a derivative of the week. And this is what we do and what we include as well in our MTPs. We include the knowledge organizers. Please, Gronya, tell me to shut up when it's time, because I'm gonna lose track. Derivative of the week, and we have obviously the very simple one, and we're explaining them in order to increase social capital and literacy in our school. And then we're using this derivative to create their own sentence. So Clement was held in servitude by Caecilius and his family. So they are from year 7, they are very, very grasped with the idea of a derivative, which, as Henry said as well, could be very, very useful later on when they're going to go towards GCSE. And this one again on without any exception at all. So you're going to see this slide every single lesson. Now, again, broadly, in language at key stage 3, we have 2 grammatical features introduced per half term, no more, in a control sequence. So for example, if I talk about ablative and prepositions, we're going to do ablative and then prepositions. We're not going to do ablative and then we go to cum clauses, for example, something that is irrelevant. So participles, which is obviously has the element of passive inside. So I got participles and passive. So again, those features should interlink. And the civilization is again on a termly basis. We do projects and competitions that, and this could be a poster perhaps, and things that students could engage and use this engagement of the civilization as the vehicle to learn the language. Now, the power of curriculum sequencing is that I've read this article, which is wonderful, and I've got the link here. Bronya can share it later. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. We have the foreshadowing, the reference, embellishment, and evolution. They are very, very generic there, but the next slide, it has something related from stage 3, or stage 5, sorry, which is my favorite stage. So how can we sequence our MTPs in a way that can benefit, obviously, our students? And there are the foreshadowing, what we are doing right now that could be referred later. Where have we seen this before? The reference, and what does it remind us? Embellishment of how does this have relationship with what happened previously? And you can use this for our stories. And the evolution, how does our understanding of previous concept inform our understanding for this one? And this is the example that I created for stage 5. I'm going to give you a minute to read this as quickly as possible. Of what actually this can be translated into the 4 elements of the curriculum sequencing.
Are you close to the end of your presentation, Pantelis?
Yes.
Great.
Okay. And then the very last thing is that beyond classroom and curriculum, be passionate in doing things outside of the lesson, outside of the classroom. This is the things that we've been doing this year: European Days, Saturnalia, idioms competitions, myth competitions, obviously Greece and Pompeii, which can be painful in terms of work, chef competition, that you have this beautiful bread that has been made, and the national spelling bee that a lot of you might already know. All these trips, all these things that we've been doing, they've been, and mosaics and clay workshop could be quite engaging and worth trying as well in your classroom, and including them on your MTPs. That's it from me.
Thanks ever so much, Pantelis. That was fab, and you've included so much information there. I will, as Pantelis said, I will be able to share some of those links that he's included in his PowerPoint slide. Thanks ever so much, Pantelis. If you're happy to stop screen sharing.
Yes, I will.
We are going to hear from a contrasting centre now. We're going to hear from Laura.
Yeah, hi.
Laura, before I go, I'm so sorry, but I have a lesson. Otherwise, I would have stayed, and I'm so sorry I cannot hear you, but I'm going to catch up with you later.
No worries.
Thanks, Pantelis.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Let me just get my slides sorted, just a second. Okay. Can you see the screen?
It's all good. Thanks, Laura.
Okay, lovely. So I am, as I say, at a contrasting school. I'm from Queenswood School in Hertfordshire, and I just want to give you a little bit of information on our school and the books that we use. So yeah, as I say, this is a bit of a contrast. We are an all-girls private school in Hertfordshire. We're lucky enough to have 2 hours a week of classics on timetable. We have a mix of language and civilization to cover in that time. And we definitely have mixed ability classes with a range of SEND in our classrooms, some with TAs, some not. But we are definitely a mixed ability school. We start them off in year 7 by doing CLC 1. So not putting too much pressure on the language side of things, but looking at the culture and sort of getting them used to how we want them to learn vocabulary and sort of tackle translations. But mostly it's to do with immersing them in the culture and getting the bug. Then we'll move into year 8. We kind of start again. We move on to De Romanis. So we are very proudly a De Romanis school. We cover roughly chapters 1 to 5 in year 8. year 9, we plough ahead and go up to, if we can, into year 10. And we are lucky enough to have Latin, classical Greek, and classical civilization on timetable at GCSE, and Latin and classical civilization at A level. So we are quite spoilt that they are very supportive of the classics here. So I want to talk about the De Romanis books that we use and what an average sort of half term looks like using those books. So I'm looking at the spring term. No, I'm not, sorry. Yeah, the end of the spring term, and just to give you an idea of sort of what we do and what it looks like. So our scheme of work, I've divided this up in a second, but we should be at the end of chapter 3, beginning of chapter 4, at the end of the spring term. We divided up our sort of approach to planning into what important language and grammar points do we need to know, what civilization points do the textbooks use, and how can we then add things in to sort of bring it to life. The De Romanis books are, in our opinions, really, really good for sort of the grammar and the logical approach, but we enliven it a little bit more with our civilization and work to our students' abilities and strengths. So the first thing we looked at when we were planning Spring 2 was what are the main language points we've got to do and what stories do we have to accompany them from the books. So highlighted in yellow on the screen are the sort of new grammar points that the students won't have met before. Adverbs will be new, the irregular verbs and some questioning words, but they have met the imperfect tense last year when we did CLC 1. So we can already know that we need to spend less time on that and more time on the rest of it. And the chapter 4 vocabulary will be new. A big part of the De Romanis philosophy is front loading that vocabulary. So they already learn their vocabulary, including the parts of speech, before they'll encounter them in stories. It enables them to access the story in a different way rather than spending time looking it up in the back of the book. So we'll spend quite a lot of time making sure they're ready to start the chapter 4 chapter 4 stories before we get there. So it's important for us to make sure that we've planned that in. Sorry, we've got 4 stories in chapters 3 and 4 that we use to accompany this language learning along with the exercises. We use one of them as an extension task for some of our students who are going to move a lot quicker in the classroom and will love the extra challenge. And we can therefore structure, scaffold, modulate some of the others for students who are going to need a little bit more support. If we don't get through all 4 of them in class time, that's fine. 3 of them will be optimal. But we will play that along with the needs of the class. We'll differentiate quite heavily depending on which class we've got. In amongst this language work, which kind of follows the textbook through quite logically, we then layer in our civilization work. So again, what does the textbook give us and what can we add in? So if we've got time, we'll tackle the items in blue. So maybe the attacks on Rome and the importance of animals in the ancient world can be quite a fun one. But what we really want to focus on in this half term is the sort of underworld or sort of religious side of things. So we'll do starters or plenaries on Roman temples, different priests, the idea of sacrifices. Even though we're a girls' school, they get quite into that and they get quite sort of in love with the gory side of things. And we spend quite a lot of time on the punishments, curses, and underworld section. And we turn that into a project. As we get to the Easter holidays, we're all a bit tired, so a good civilization project kind of rolls the term off nicely. And then we add in these supporting activities on the right-hand side. So depending on the interests of the class or let's say the behavior of the class, we will reenact a sacrifice with like a soft toy, or we'll teach them about auguries, and then we'll go out onto the field and read the bird signs. Writing a curse tablet, one of our favorite ones. So that's one of their homework projects. They've got 2 weeks to write a curse tablet. They write it backwards in sort of gobbledygook language. They love that one. And then our big project at the end of the term, the last 2 lessons would be a project on the Roman underworld. So for example, we start off with a really simple map like this, guiding them through the different points in the underworld, sort of getting them to label the different areas and getting kind of used to sort of the mythology of it. And then their project would be to go away and do better. So they can make a better map or a sort of an Instagram account on a person's trip through the underworld, a tourist brochure, these kinds of things. So they can get creative with it. They've got a break, if you like, from the sort of the grammar and the language focus that we usually have. But they get really quite amazingly creative with it. I'm not sure if I can show you one of the videos that they did. Let me see if I can just change that tab over to this one. Hopefully this will work. I'm not so sure. But in Roblox, one of my students built the underworld. So they presented this in class. River Styx, Charon's Ferry. They could give the gold coin over. And it's a very long video, so I won't play it all for you. But they built the entirety of that world, if you like, and then had a chance to take us through it. So for us, we're not necessarily focused on pushing them towards taking Latin over classics or Greek. We just want their sort of natural interest in the ancient world to have a chance to shine. Some students are going to really struggle with the language. We support them, and then they can choose sort of their options later. And some really do enjoy that sort of very sort of grammar focused logical approach. So trying to keep that in one classroom, I think, is our sort of struggle. But by interweaving it and adding in our own options, that's how we kind of make it work here. That's all I've got, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, it wasn't as long as the other one.
That was fab. Thanks ever so much, Laura. It's really interesting to see how a different centre is approaching their Key Stage 3 schemes of work differently. That's brilliant. Okay, so for Key Stage 4, we have Charlie and Athena, again from two very different schools. Charlie, am I right in saying, are you up first? Yes, great, thank you.
I'm happy to go first. Can you hear me? Okay, great. And then sorry, everyone else is so slick. I just start sharing, do I? Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine if you just start screen sharing.
So I've got a really slow laptop. The internet connection should be fine. This is where also everyone gets to see how untidy my desktop is. So it should be okay. Okay, so this is Charles Ferber here, but Charlie's fine. So I'm the have been for the last 2 years the director of the Latin Excellence Program. I'm going to sort of somewhat tricky position, as Grynia may have alluded to already, in that I've got quite a lot to talk about over the next 10 minutes. My cover emergency happened at period 2 and not right now, so it's not quite as bad as Pantelis's one, but I will try and get through over the course of the next 10 minutes. Sort of one is just giving the people on this call either sort of preliminary info or an update on what the Latin Excellence Program is and where we're up to it. And then I will also provide some insight into what our planning looks like for Key Stage 4, especially given that we have, some KPIs for student performance at GCSE and sort of in terms of the design of the program. GCSE is so important, blah, blah, blah. So if you've not heard of the Latin Excellence Program, it is as you can see here, kind of DFE funded initiative that was launched in September 23. And the aim is to either kind of launch or develop Latin provisions, Latin departments in 40 state secondaries across England. There's a regional focus. I'm going to have to start making sacrifices in terms of how much information I give. There is a regional focus on those 40 state secondaries, which is, for want of a better way of putting it, from the kind of Midlands upwards, and also in the Southwest, based on kind of historic underrepresentation of Latin in the state sector. In terms of our actual objectives of the program, there's a very strong emphasis on recruitment of students and also making sure that performance at GCSE is high in those state schools. So it's not just going to be a kind of Key Stage 3 provision and then not sort of checking for students going through to GCSE. Of those 40 that we recruited, 15 of them had some form of Latin provision already, but 25 of them have started Latin from scratch. And of the 46 of them are schools in future academies or secondary schools. Future academies is a sort of mid-size to small size. It's not as big as Harris, Multi-Academy Trust. 3 of our schools are in London. 3 of those secondaries are in Hertfordshire. And we're very, very fortunate to have Latin as a compulsory offer, a compulsory part of the curriculum at Key Stage 3. So we have 100 minutes a week of kids from year 7 through to year 9. And we've been launching that since, either since 2016 at Pimlico Academy, which is where I'm sat right now, or in the Hertfordshire schools, that was in 2020. Now, of the 40, 23 schools currently have a Key Stage 4 offer. We're moving for that to be 35 over the next couple of years. And then of those 23 schools, 170 odd were in year 11. So we've already had a fairly substantial number of kids sit the GCSE. The last paper of which was 3 years ago. We sit the EDUCAS board. You can see the last point there. And in terms of what course I actually study, this is the part that might be sort of a bit odd, but we, you know, I've been writing the Future Academies, or the LEP curriculum as it now is, since 2016 when I joined at Pimlico Academy. And so we have our own fully resourced Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 curriculum. I will be showing you the odd sample from that over the course of the next few minutes. That includes long-term plans and the kind of the planning. I think the key thing maybe to get across is that, sort of unlike, say, the off-the-shelf curricula like the CLC or De Romanis, our model is one that is much more sort of, you know, granular. It's not kind of top-down, I suppose, but a lot of the lesson design, you know, it's designed lesson by lesson in terms of what teachers get. It is, you know, designed at a very specific level, including, for example, you know, every slide deck is made, teacher guides are fully written. I know that's the case across the offer. We have home learning booklets that are fully written. We have kind of adapted booklets that are fully written. In terms of what we tend to like, the two strands for Key Stage 4 that have emerged over the course of the last couple of years are as follows. The left-hand side is kind of your more sort of Future Academies offer. So where we've got Key Stage 3 on timetable, we're able to recruit large cohorts. So usually at least 2 sets across schools. We've had, you know, sort of Pimlico, we tend to get 50 kids a year out of the 200 per, you know, sort of form entry. We've had, you know, the greatest successes would be some of our schools in Hertfordshire. We've recruited 50% of the cohort in the past. And these cohorts are, you know, we really open the doors to everyone. There's a really strong emphasis in terms of our timetable provision on making sure that mixed ability students can access the course and be successful. When I say mixed ability, I mean students where, you know, their target grade at GCSE will be a 4, maybe even underneath. And so we'll be aiming to get them at least that grade, if not pushing even higher, which we have historically done. Our teachers are people who are trained classics teachers who will have classics degrees. As I've mentioned, the provision is on timetable, and we're fortunate enough to have this full Key Stage 3 offer. There are some other schools on the Latin Excellence Programme which are able to offer that model where they've got Latin on timetable already, and have got, you know, sort of West London Free School, for example, in Hammersmith has 30 plus kids coming in next year in year 10, and they joined the program this year. Our other offer, and the one that's kind of emerged more in the Northwest and in Yorkshire, is one where you've got these kind of smaller cohorts at the minute, and they're sort of currently more able, and I think this kind of fits more towards the sort of cliche of what GCSE Latin teaching looks like in the state sector, although we're working with those schools to get their offer to look, you know, over the next couple of years more like the one on the left. But you've got these smaller cohorts with usually more able recruited students in there. They're usually taught by MFL teachers, sometimes history teachers, but by non-specialists who we're training up to teach Latin GCSE. The offer is usually on timetable, but quite a lot of it is part of a kind of robust extracurricular offer. So of somewhere between 90 minutes a week to 2 hours a week. And that is off the back of a partial Key Stage 3 offer. A popular model at the minute is teaching at year 9, starting the kids off at year 9, kind of giving them a taster of 1 hour a week there, and then transition them into a timetabled 2-year Key Stage 4 offer. So at that point, what does Key Stage 4 look like in terms of the planning, particularly where, you know, we've got, you know, more towards that box on the right there, where you've got GCSE being taught pretty quickly by non-experts. The model we're going for in terms of how you spread the Latin teaching over the 2 years, and most of our schools, we offer it is a 2-year Key Stage 4 offer. Using the EDUCAS components, this kind of at a glance is sort of what I think most people run. Is kind of the modal way of chunking the GCSE across 2 years. So we cover about 80% of component 1 in year 10. We try and cover all of the Civ in year 10, and then finishing off year 11, but with a big focus on the literature component in year 11, as I mentioned. What that then covers, and I will be talking to you for the remaining 3.5 minutes about this, is the actual bit of planning, which is the problem that we found year on year is how do you kind of keep the motivation and the retention and the sort of up over the course of year 11, where usually of the kind of 3 lessons a week on timetable, 2 of them are given over to literature and 1 of them is given over to grammar. The teaching that you're doing of those grammar topics is usually pretty tough topics. So as you can see, that's kind of our sequence there from what's called chapter 14 of the year 11 textbook, according to our model. And often there's issues there in terms of, as I said, how do you keep the practice up? It tends to just be formal grammar lessons. The vocab's difficult. You're getting to the point where they're learning the last 100 words or the 450 on the DVL. And it can be tricky, as I said, to keep retention and to keep motivation for students. I think often at this point, most teachers, even those who abide, you know, again, I don't want to generalizations, but I'm sort of constrained to doing that. I think you usually, even where you're using Cambridge Latin course or using reading comprehension courses, by the time you get to this point at the end of year 11, it tends to be the case that people do kind of go for more kind of specific grammar lessons and that kind of approach. And we do, I should have mentioned before that our approach is much more on the side of De Romanis and grammar translation, as opposed to that of CRC and Soberani. Although actually, it's off the back of what both Pantelis and Laura have talked about, there is some crossover. I will briefly, I could do about an hour on each of these 4 things, but I have 2 minutes left to go. So I will actually just briefly talk through in terms of what we're doing. I'm really pleased that actually 2 of these have come up already, so maybe I won't have to talk about them as much. We really do ascribe, it's nice to see that Harris and Future Academies are on the kind of same page in terms of the alignment, in terms of how planning works. We like to plan backwards, so you kind of, there is a teleology, I suppose. I'm talking to classicists, so people won't know, everyone will know what that means. In terms of how the planning works, you think, well, what is my endpoint at the end, and how am I going to then stagger that backwards? And I think what I'll do is show you the next slide on that, which should give you an insight in terms of how that looks across the course. We really, really do ascribe to the pre-teaching of vocabulary, which is a thing that De Romanis does. Specifically with regard to making sure that when you are teaching hard grammar lessons at the end of year 11, students are not thinking, what does that word mean? It should be that all the words are fully retained. Instead of thinking, what does that word mean in terms of, I don't know what conspicuo means, they should be thinking, well, what does conspexit mean within the context of this clause that I'm looking at? And so all the emphasis in terms of inference should go on syntax and not on vocabulary. And then these next 2 bullet points. So this next one, scaffolding and iteration, are kind of, it's quite buzzwordy. They're sort of sometimes overused in terms of the language of curriculum design. I will show you an example of what I mean in a second in terms of just going over core things and making sure that key sentences are chunked down in the right way. And then last of all, we have this homework offer, which makes sure that key learning is practiced over and over again. I will briefly show you what I'm talking about in terms of the contextualization of teaching the sequence that I mentioned. So I talked to you before about what does, and if anything, I know we were meant to just talk about a term, but really this is kind of looking at about 6 months worth. But when you're teaching, so sort of maybe the first half term will be chapter 14, where we want to get them up to. I'm just sort of started about 3 thoughts there at the same time. A common sentence type at GCSE is this turbo with genitive plural and present participle type. Okay, so usually to do with crowds of enemies holding stuff. So it comes up in the WJEC past paper for Caesar invading Gaul, where he, Caesar can see the ancient Celts, ancient Britons on the cliffs of Dover, and there they are, turbam postium, gladios tenentium, blah, 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 blah. Now, that sentence in and of itself is pretty tough. What we want to do is we want to make sure that all of our students are able to access a sentence like that when they sit the GCSE, whatever level of prior attainment they're at. In order to do that, you make sure that subsequent sentences, you keep it. There's kind of like a sort of reciprocal process here where not only does that initial hard sentence keep coming up, but also you keep reworking it every time you then see a comparable thing in subsequent chapters. So a really easy thing that students can confuse when they see conspicuo is it going to be introducing a participle phrase with the present participle, or is it actually going to be introducing a direct statement? So we make sure that that kind of sentence comes up again in the next chapter. Deponents, you've got to kind of skip, but we make sure staff know about that. And then you've got this really nice instance where you can then rework that sentence by then subbing in turba or manus or manum for turba as in a group, and then subbing in ferro for tenentium or for teneo, because they're kind of synonyms. And so that way you have these core sentence types, really frequent sentence type at GCSE, but they just keep coming up over and over again across the chapters. This isn't just the case for the emperor seeing some enemies holding stuff. This is also the case for, I don't, a dozen more really frequent sentence types that just keep being iterated across the course. So at that point, when you then transition into students seeing past papers, it becomes much more feasible for them. The access is improved. I've gone over, I'm sorry. And then last of all, this is the last thing. In terms of what preaching looks like, it's not just a manner of saying, here's the words now you're going to be able to access. We know that certain words are identified and come up with certain grammar topics. So in terms of before even looking at that chapter 14 sentence there, they would have gone over these words in a discrete timetabled lesson. And there you can see they would have seen conspicuo and revised it, but it would have been revised in the context of conficio and constituo. Conficio is really popular, is Confectus coming up as PPP, which they'll also see in that chapter. Constituo is really popular when introducing, or is quite popular when introducing indirect statements, which comes up in chapter 15. So I've just given you quite a kind of granular, sort of, you know, real kind of minutiae level insight into what the design of the curriculum looks like in terms of making sure that all the bases are covered. Here's some couple, I've not got time for this. Here's some couple of instances of what our homework booklets look like. All these things, you can see that one of the multiple choice questions that students do in a booklet at home is one down here, which looks like kind of reworks the kind of sentence that they just did. And then I'm going to have to, I can talk about dissemination, how we train people up, but I've gone way over and I'm really sorry. If you want to hear any more about the program, there's tons more I could say, as I've mentioned, then please do let me know. My email is down there. But other than that, thanks very much for listening. And I can only apologize again for having gone over.
All right, thanks ever so much, Charlie. I know I've set you all six of you, a very difficult task, but that was really, really informative. And I'm going to hand over now to Athena.
Hi everyone, thanks so much, and thank you, Charlie. That was really, really interesting. I've learned a huge amount already just by being on this, so thank you so much. That's fantastic. I've got a very different context, and therefore my talk is going to be quite different as well, which may be good, hopefully. And I've got 9 minutes. So I'm at a independent private school in London, just girls, and it's quite a small school. So we very much tailor our scheme of work to the individuals that we have signing up for the course. Let me just share my screen and see how to do that. No, that didn't work. Sorry. There we go. Hopefully that works now. So what we're thinking of as a centre is very much how to use AI to help with our teaching and learning. So this year and next year, we've got some sets with some girls who are very bright and capable, but they're not sort of the brightest. And the way we teach it means that they need a lot of kind of extra support with learning that grammar and vocabulary and maintaining that throughout when we do the literature side of the course. So just for like a little bit of context, we have Latin in year 7 to 9, 1 hour a week. We used to use the John Taylor, and now we're changing to Subarani. So this is our first year of having Subarani. So we're kind of slowly building it up. And then for the GCSE itself, we kind of plan it like this. So autumn and spring, we do all of the language and grammar using John Taylor Part 2. Then in the summer half term, the first half term, we build up the language. So do a lot of consolidation of language, making sure they're confident so they can sit an actual past paper in the summer exam. And then after the summer half term, we move on to literature, often the verse, but it depends on the teacher. And then the second, in the second year, so year 11, we complete that verse. They have a mock in November, which is a full language and then half a literature paper. Then we do the other set text. And then by spring half term, so February half term, we've completed the whole course. One is how we can use AI. And here I'm definitely piggy banking on the University of Reading, who did this brilliant presentation recently, and this is kind of what we're using. So one, and I'm very obviously happy to share all of these links with you later if you are interested. So one is the Dirigenda Latin vocab list. I'm sure everyone is probably familiar with things like Quizlet. This one I really like because it has all the different vocab options that you can be using. And so it creates the test for you, and the pupils can sit it themselves. You can print off a test or they can work on it. And something in particular with Latin that we're also building into our lessons that I've started doing this term after I went to a brilliant inset by Catherine Medici is spending a lot of lesson time learning vocab. I feel like in the past it was something that it was like, go off and learn your vocab on your own. But actually we have to teach them how to do that. And we have to model it in our lessons and give that time to learning vocab in order to really cement it. And since I've started doing that, the progress has been amazing. It sounds really obvious afterwards, but so what she recommended, which I've started doing, is you sort of, like you were saying before, Charlie, about giving them the vocab before the lesson or before the topic or paragraph that you're going to be translation or whatever it is, have all of those words written out. Then the students then self-select, okay, how many of these words am I going to promise to learn in the next 5 minutes or however long you can assign to it. They have a number, they commit to learning that number, and obviously that's very differentiated by the individuals. Then they do the vocab test, and they write at the top how many words that they've committed to learning. And then when they self-mark, and it's very important that it's self-marking as opposed to teacher or peer marking, they then can put their score as a number out of the ones that they pledged to learn that day. And the benefit of that, obviously, is it's very individuated, but it also gives them that sense of pride and achievement, and they see the progress that they're making. And I did that this year. I had a very mixed ability set with my year 11s. I had some who were absolutely amazing and some who found it really, really difficult. And as soon as I started doing this strategy, the ones who previously had kind of given up on vocab almost were making real progress, and it really spurred them on to keep going. So this is something that we're looking to implement more kind of rigorously and then introduce lower down in the school as well. Both the idea of lesson time for vocab, but then also making it individuated. Then this is a tool that I'm going to start using next year more. It's by the Open University Interactive tool, and it's good because it has grammar. And in the past, I'd only found sort of AI websites for vocab, but this tool allows you to do more. If I can share, hopefully, does that show? Can you see the interactive menu? Has that come up? Yeah, okay, brilliant. So if you choose, for example, noun recognition, it gives you a question, select all the nominatives and check. So let's say I do that one and I check it, am I right? Oh, I'm stuck, give me a hint, and it will give me a hint if I ask on it. And then you can go on to verb preferences and you can set up how you want it to look, etc., etc. And I find this is, again, another really useful thing to use in lessons, or at least I'm planning to use it in lessons, so that they have some time to consolidate on their grammar learning as well as on their vocab learning. So again, this is something that I feel in the past we've neglected or haven't done as sort of much as possible. And it has also little things for verb formation. We're now as a school going digital, so pupils will have iPads in lessons and devices. So this is something that they can very easily do as a quick start or a quick plenary, even a quick mid-lesson, right? We're just going to reinforce our verbs before we tackle this passage, etc. And it's all done there for you. And it's something that they can then work on at home independently as well, as opposed to the teacher having to create more resources. Our time is probably better spent elsewhere. Then there's this other website which is really good for parsing tests or translations of longer passages. So there's a blurb that the University of Reading have figured out, and obviously I'm very happy to share that with everyone. And I can show you what it looks like once you put it in. Sorry, this one here. So this is the blurb, and it's done all the work for you. And then, for example, you can ask it to provide you with words, and then the students will have to parse it. Here are 5 Latin adjectives for each word, parse the word, and then if you give the answer below, it will give you some feedback on how you're doing. And this then you can build up to different things. So if I show you the bottom one that I've created, I said, right, please can you create 5 extra sentences from Latin to GCSE Part 1, Chapter 3, and it will give you these sentences. You then reply and it will mark it for you. I think this is going to be really interesting and really useful, again, for those extension sentences, for that extension support for people who may have missed lessons. This is extra practice. We're toying with whether we should give this to the pupils so that they can create their own materials or not. But it's definitely a way to help create more resources and more translations that we can use throughout our teaching to sort of supplement what we already have in our textbooks. Don't know about you, but I often find we run out of things, or when it comes to revision in particular, we don't have new sentences to go over. So this is a quick way of doing it, and it's accurate and it works. So when we're planning to use this, autumn and spring, as I said, we're planning to do all the language and grammar. We want to use a lot of these within our lessons and within homeworks so that the pupils reinforce their learning and kind of learn it in the proper way. But then we're going to return to it throughout the year 11 when they are doing their literature, but keeping that language going at the same time. So I've run out of time, but thank you very much.
That's fab. Thanks ever so much, Athena. It's really interesting to see how you're going to be incorporating AI into the way that you're planning and teaching. Okay, whistle stops are all so far, but we are now moving on to Key Stage 5. And we have Julie and Jess, again, 2 contrasting centres. And Julie, I think you are presenting first for us. Oh, you're muted.
Apologies, thank you. Right, let me just see if I can share my screen and then we will get going. Here we go. Okay, can I just check you can see that? Is that on the screen?
Yeah, that's all there. That's good. Yeah.
Good. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. As you know, if you were here at my initial session, my name is Julie Wilkinson, and I am teaching at Noah Hill High School. Just to give you a little bit of information about the local context, as Grania said, we've got two contrasting schools here. So Noah Hill is a state academy. Our students, if they are doing A-level from us lower down the school, they studied Educas, Latin, GCSE. We have mixed ability classrooms prior to GCSE. And if you are taking A-level Latin, you have to have achieved a grade 6 or above at GCSE, which is a lower entry point than a lot of schools expect. And we're part of what's called the Harrow Collegiate Alliance. I'm co-director of that. It's an alliance of 25 basically local schools, mainly in the state sector. And we have set up a system whereby to enable us to have numbers that are viable, students could potentially come from other schools who may not offer the subject at A-level. And so as a consequence of that, our timetable is blocked to enable the students to travel from one school to another. And so they're blocked weekly into one quadruple session. Each lesson is 50 minutes and a double lesson, so that's 120 minutes, to enable students to travel between schools. So it's not ideal. Obviously, it's better if you can have more lessons with students during the week with a bit more space in between, but it's to enable students to go from one school to another. At Noah Hill, we have a 2-week timetable. And so over each of those weeks, in the 2 weeks, there are basically 6 50-minute periods, but broken up into the quadruple and double in each week. The numbers vary. Generally, we have between 2 and 10 students. We're very lucky that actually we are able to run with relatively low numbers. The numbers have dropped considerably since Noah Hill's AS offer was removed. We had a good number in year 12, but that offer has been removed across the collegiate, and that's in all subjects actually apart from maths. So we just offer A2. And if you are a subject where there are fewer than 10 students in a class, you lose 1 period of teaching time a week. The idea being that with a smaller cohort, you can get through things more quickly. What I tend to do, because I'm an assistant head, I ask to have the official 2 rather than 3 periods a week, so that normally I can find a space somewhere on my timetable where I can then teach all of those periods. Okay, so just very quickly, in case any of you is new to the A-level, you can see the 4 units that they are assessed on by the end of the 2-year course. And so what we do at Noah Hill, year 12 for us is about skill development. And we have 2 teachers. We are a large department. We have generally either 4 or 5 specialist teachers. And so for A-level, we have 2 teachers, and each of those teachers teaches 3 periods. And we divide it for 50% of the time. So if you assume that teacher 1 has 3 periods and teacher 2 has 3 periods of 50 minutes. So teacher number 1 will teach the prose literature, will teach prose composition in year 12. We'll make sure the students go through the AS vocabulary checklist, and they will have a focus on the consolidation of the weekly verb, tenses, mood testers. And then teacher number 2, and this is usually me. So it's verse literature that I teach the unseen translations, and I focus on the consolidation of weekly testers, nouns, participles, adjectives, pronouns. So we separate out that accidents between us. And then when we go into year 13, we're much more focused on the actual exam paper rather than more so in terms of the skill-based. But we continue with the first teacher teaching prose literature, teaching prose composition, but also comprehension, because by year 13, either the students have decided, or the teacher and the students have decided that maybe they are going to do much better in the comprehensions, but at least, even if they haven't decided, they're reminded of, you know, how you do well in comprehension paper. There is a revision on the AS vocabulary checklist. There is a continued focus on consolidation of weekly verb tense and mood testers. And obviously then there is a development of the vocabulary linked to the prose. And then the other teacher, again, so this is me, verse literature. We use the Matthew Owen book for the unseen translations. And so we move from the AS translations of unseens, which is the John Taylor that we use. And obviously when we get on to A2, we're looking at Ovid as well as prose authors' vocabulary. And we continue that focus on consolidation of the weekly testers with the nouns, participles, adjectives, and pronouns. So what I thought I would do is I would talk through our process using sort of 3 different planning mechanisms. So for a good number of years as a department, we've used what we call year planners, where we plan out just the basics of what we are teaching each week. And obviously everybody has their different mechanisms of planning, but I just thought this might be an easy way of showing how it is that we work our way through on a half-term basis. So starting off looking at the Year 12 prose lit and prose composition, the autumn half-term 1. So the focus with the language work is to ensure that students are really understanding the grammar that they had learnt at GCSE. And obviously then understanding the basic grammar at GCSE then really supports their way in to the prose composition. And as you can see, you have your weekly testers working your way through the AS vocabulary list that we have set up on a theme basis. And we did that a number of years ago. So you can see the prose composition, you can see the vocabulary, and then of course getting started on the literature. And then if we look at the equivalent with the verse lit and unseen translation, again using a year planner in the autumn half term. So one of the things that I find particularly useful right at the very beginning of the course is to show students specimen A-level papers. Now, obviously, in terms of the language work, they're not really going to know the constructions, but getting them to see what a language paper will look like at the end of the course, an unseen paper. But particularly, it's looking at the literature and looking at the type of questions that they are going to have to answer in less than 2 years' time. And that I find is a really useful start point because they start to see what it is that they are gearing up to. Now, in terms of teaching them literature, verse literature, we have summer bridging work. I'm quite sure a number of schools do that, where if I'm being honest, if the children can come to me in September being basically GCSE level again, I'm happy, because obviously for a lot of them, they have stopped looking at Latin in May or June, whenever their last exam was, and it's quite a hard climb getting them back again. And so their summer bridging work for language is to try and get them back to GCSE, but that first half term is just to reassure them that if they've got the GCSE construction sorted out, then they're doing really well. But with the literature, what I will do is I will give them an introduction to Virgil's Aeneid, and that's done partly through clips over the summer and then also at the beginning of the course. And then in terms of verse analysis, so they've already had an idea of what they're going to be tested on right at the end of the course. And this was something that I think Bob Lister introduced to me many decades ago. And this was introducing A-level analysis through using a different author, through using Catullus. And we used Catullus's poem, Ille me par esse. And they compare different translations and analytical features in that poem. And that means that right in the early days, when they don't really feel that they know anything very much about Virgil, they're sort of practicing on another author. So moving on then, so this is another planning mechanism that we use. So this is still the autumn half term. And this is something that as a school, we're all being asked to put together by the end of this academic year. And these are medium-term planning documents, and they all cover the same basic areas. But the idea is that these are supporting all of our planning. Excuse me. And again, as you can see here, you've got the information that I've just talked about. It's just that the format is in a slightly different way. And you will see when you have a look at our documentation, and I'm really conscious that my first session was on cognitive load, and I'm going to be producing a lot of information here. And so my assumption is that I'm going to talk through the sort of the overview, and if you want to have a look at it in more detail later on, please do. But you will see that there is a lot of recapping. So right from week 1, when we might be doing the literature in English, or we're working through the literature very, very slowly, that we actually do summaries of the text. So over the summer, they've not only been introduced to the Aeneid through a range of videos, but we ask them to read through the prescription just in English. And every single week we look at summaries of the literature set text, and they put those in order, and they do that throughout the entire course. And that is particularly useful for A2 when they're asked to do their 20 marker. And then just moving on, so you can see here a little bit more clearly how the prose composition is set out, looking at the different constructions. And certainly I do not introduce an AS unseen until after the first half term. I'm just building up each week their confidence and their competence in their GCSE grammar. And by the time they get to the October half term, for me, they've not only revised the GCSE grammar, because I know that's been covered by the other teacher, but also for me, then I'm introducing all the new grammatical constructions that they need for the A-level. So when it gets to the October half term, having covered all the basic grammar that they need for A-level, I then feel I can start going through unseen translations. And we go through those very, very slowly. If you have a look here, so I'm moving on now, looking at year 13, but in year 12, once we have gone past the October half term and we start looking at unseen translations, it may well take 2 weeks for us to go through one translation from the John Taylor book. And the reason it takes so long is, again, cognitive overload. I've realized that in the past, when I've tried to set them up early doing an unseen, they've just got too scared and they don't feel they're able to do it. And so what we do is we work our way through the constructions in a particular passage. So they're reminded of what they covered in the first half term. They're told the main constructions that are going to be in a passage. They then look at the passage. They try to identify where those constructions are. We then annotate the passage together so that if prior to that they haven't identified the 10 constructions, during that point they then will do so. And having separately annotated, and then often what I will do is I will put one person's annotations under the visualizer, and together we will have a look at how accurate that is. And if it's one particular passage and I've got 4 students in front of me, I'll do a quarter at a time. So every one of them has got the same experience from me, and they get used to the fact that it doesn't matter if they've made mistakes, because it's all part of the learning experience. And only once we've talked about the constructions, only once we've talked about the annotations, are they then going to start doing those translations. And if I'm honest, I rarely ask them to do an A-level translation, certainly in year 12, outside lesson time. And although people may feel that that uses up a lot of time, my worry is that if they're doing it at home, well, we have ChatGTP that can do a very good job of translating, but also if they are very diligent students, they can often spend hours. If they're a less diligent student, they might just make a complete mess of it, and there doesn't really seem to be much point in that. So they do it in class, I give them a set amount of time, and then at least I know what it is that they've had a common experience of doing that work. And then I will mark those, and then we will go through them together. So Moving on then, so that's how we would operate through year 12. When we're moving on to year 13, obviously our translations are coming along much more quickly, and we're moving much more quickly onto the literature set text. So here's just one example, the spring half term for year 13 planner. And here is the exact same, but with the verse literature and the unseen translations for the same half term. You will notice that we have got the two different lessons. So it might be if it's week 1 or if it's week 2. And so sometimes it might be that I have 2 lessons one week and 4 lessons the next week, because we have a 2-week timetable. That's why you've got a difference here. And what you've got on the right-hand side is the program of homework. And again, thinking about cognitive load, if I'm being honest, on the whole, what I use homeworks for, and this is both in year 12 and in year 13, is for the students to consolidate their knowledge. So that I rarely, as a teacher of literature, will ask my students to be preparing the next bit of literature. If it is in Latin, I may well ask them to prepare it in English, but generally I am more likely to be asking them to consolidate what they did the previous week. So we'll have gone through a passage, we will have analysed that passage together, and then for their homework, they will be asked to work through the notes that we've gone through together in class, and they're asked to add to their annotations information from the commentary. And we use the zigzag commentary very successfully. We sometimes use other commentaries, but that's always our start point. And so they're expected, having gone through the literature together in class, I guide them through their translations in year 12. So they're given a translation in year 12 by me. We link it up together in class. We then annotate that passage together in class. Then they go home, they check their notes, they check they've understood it, and they add to their annotations from the commentary. And then the following week, they will come back to me and they will let me know if there was anything in the commentary that they didn't understand. So the expectation is, after a week or so where we will go through the commentary together, and I will talk to them about how to use it, I will talk to them about the literary devices and how to utilize those. They are the ones coming back to me if they didn't understand something. And the next bit of their homework, as well as consolidating their knowledge from class, is to have revised either something they did the week before, or maybe a month before, or maybe half a term before, ready for a tester. So their homeworks are predominantly consolidation or revision for an upcoming test. And you can see here how many testers we have. Now, I know that sounds really boring. It's tester, tester, tester. But what it is doing is, as we go through the course, and usually by the time we get onto the second half of year 13, it's possibly the 3rd iteration of the literature that they studied in year 12. So we will have finished the AS prescription. So I finished my AS prescription now. We have been revising the AS prescription all the way through year 12 anyway. They've had testers all the way through year 12 anyway. And going into year 13, obviously they're then able to utilize what they've learned in year 12. And I will almost always use the Virgil, because I do feel that if they're going on to university to study a classical subject, not to have covered any Virgil would be a real shame. And if they've studied half of the Virgil set text, if I'm being honest, given that they have to study the other half in English, I feel I'm doing them a disservice to ask them to do a second set text. And we've decided that across both of the authors as well. So by the time they get on to A2, they have consolidated their understanding. They have read all the English of both the AS and the A2 parts. So they are ready to move on to writing the 20 markers, even if they are not doing all the examples in Latin. They're doing most of that initially in English. So this is the 3rd type of planner that we have. So we have the year planners, which are our basic start point, so that we know exactly what we need to cover to get through the course. We have our medium-term plans, which is a much more detailed document that means that really for me, as I'm just about at the end of doing that, when I go into next term, everything is prepared for me. I've done the preparing, but nonetheless, if there was somebody else teaching alongside me, that would be available. And then this, the Year 13 curriculum map, just as an example, is what we provide for parents. And so this is bearing down on the absolute key features. And so you can see the key skills that we're covering. Okay, I think I've had my 10 minutes, so I'm over now to Jess.
Thanks ever so much, Julie. I'm conscious we are running over. We've just got one more presentation and then we will break for lunch. Jess, over to you.
Right, I will be as quick as possible. Let me just see if I can share my side. So, my context, I am teaching at a all-girls independent school. Numbers, Latin vary. Is that shared, that screen now? Is that shared as a slideshow?
Not showing as a slideshow at the moment. It's still, but it is your PowerPoint.
How do I? It's hidden the menu at the top. Hang on. Is that now slideshow?
Yes, perfect.
Good. Okay, so I'm in an independent girls' school, but I think A-level, we'll probably find that we're at very similar class sizes, similar numbers. Ours can vary greatly, but the smaller class sizes mean that I can really adapt it to the girls and what their level is and what they're most interested in, and getting them towards it. So just a brief overview. Again, we use 2 teachers, so we split. One person does prose literature and one will then do well, I introduce the grammar and then we'll do the verse and scenes with them, so I get to do a bit of prose and verse in my teaching. And then the second teacher will do the verse literature with them, and then we'll consolidate comprehension, prose and scenes, and just kind of pick up bits where I haven't been able to cover. We intend to do, again, like Julie does, we revise GCSE language at the start of year 12, and then we use John Taylor Latin Beyond GCSE and aim to get the grammar completed, all of the new grammar completed by February half term in year 12, if we can, so we can then use the rest of year 12 and year 13 to really consolidate that understanding and practice. So they'll start off with GCSE papers. We'll introduce AS papers in year 12, and then year 12, end of year 12, we'll introduce A-level papers, but modified or giving them extra vocabulary help. And we will, depending on whether, if we've got students who are applying for Oxbridge to do Latin, then we will introduce verse and scene towards the end of year 12. If we don't do, then we can push that back into year 13 and do that a little bit later. Like Julie does at the beginning of year 12, we will introduce literature, look a bit more, remind them about literary types, and maybe look at different authors before we look at our set texts. And we aim to get the year 12 set text completed by May half term, so they can do their June exams. We'll then read the group 2, the year 13 set text in English before they break up. So again, they're familiar with it. They can start doing 20-mark questions as soon as they come back in year 13, rather than leaving that to the end. And they have a good idea, a good sense of what they're going to be doing. And we will try and get all of our set texts finished by February half term of year 13, so they do their marks immediately as they come back in February. So we'll try and leave us with plenty of revision time. And throughout year 12, year 13, both of them, we're revising all of the set text and revising all the language. So I'm trying to do this as quickly as possible. So what does a general kind of week, what does a half term look like? We set weekly studies and we alternate between us about the teachers, what we will do. The students will have a vocabulary test. We'll start with just the prose, the AS vocabulary, and then we introduce the verse vocabulary as well from the Owen textbook later on. We will also have very low stakes grammar tests and quizzes. So my student this year really just homing the endings in, so she really is confident with her tables. she seems to then forget it whenever she sees a translation. So just getting her confident with that. And also low stakes literature and translation test quizzes, recapping prior texts the literature that we've done. And we do set unseen translation exercises as a study, but we will set a time limit on it so that, as Julie mentioned, those diligent students don't spend hours and hours trying to translate something. And we do ask them to prepare sections of the set text as they come in lesson as a useful tool for using commentaries, using dictionaries, just kind of getting used to how they would do it themselves. We try as much as possible to have testing and exam conditions. If we do set studies, we're very conscious that they have tools that they can use. They're not necessarily doing it as an unseen. So we like to use as much lesson time as we can afford to do testing. Students, as Julie said, revising, making revision notes, retranslating previous passages, going back over things that they've already done, building up their vocabulary lists, as Henry spoke about earlier, and reviewing their own progress and setting their own targets, and really getting to think about how they're learning, getting them to explain how they came to a particular translation, how they knew something, so we can work out whether something was just guesswork or whether they actually recognize endings and they can explain where they came onto it. So that's what we really try and get the students to focus on, understanding what they're thinking, what are they doing, and how are they going about doing it. And resources, we use, I suppose most people use Taylor Latin Beyond GCSE. We use the Ovid Owen prose and verse unseen textbooks. My colleagues uses the Lingua Latina, the pictures, strategy or thematic vocabulary with them. So she'll revise our vocabulary using pictures and themes as possible. We use the commentaries delivered by Bloomsbury, but I also write our own commentary notes for the literature to support those and give students those. And we write literature question booklets on the whole of the set text provision that has exam style questions on everything. So the students can dip in and out of that. We can set it as studies if we want to, or they can use it as revision. But forever I get questions from parents, there's not enough past papers, we haven't set them in, you know, how can they possibly revise? There's no past papers in Latin because they could keep changing the set text. So I provide them with this exam style booklet to go over. Yeah, that was a very quick kind of overview. Grania, I'm not going to go into more detail because I think we're ready for lunch.
Thanks ever so much, Jess. And thanks to all 6 of our presenters today. I know it has been very much a whistle stop through 6 different schools and 6 different approaches to planning schemes of work that are obviously fitting into the wider context of the way that their schools are asking them to plan for medium terms or half terms. Or for parents in some instances. I will circulate all of that information afterwards, including email addresses, because I know it might be useful for you to be able to follow up individually with those teachers. But thanks again to those 6 presenters.